Today, I wanted to talk about something that I noticed that nobody else really seems to have completely picked up on. But I think it's an interesting trend in this particular individual's career, and it's fun to kind of watch it and to see what he'll do next. Um, the director I'm talking about, of course, is Brad Bird. He's a filmmaker, um, a quite popular filmmaker. He directed The Iron Giant. He directed The Incredibles. He directed Tomorrowland. Um, and I don't know if he's probably made other movies too, but those are the three that I know that I've seen. Oh, Mission Impossible. He was responsible for that one. That was a bit of an anomaly. I'm gonna pretend that Mission Impossible is not a Brad Bird film, um, and so we'll just pretend. Um, Brad Bird has made his career by making kids movies based on adult R-rated films and stories, sci-fi stories intended for a more mature audience. Um, we'll begin with The Iron Giant. The Iron Giant is a film about a robot that comes to Earth and befriends a small child. But that robot is actually supposed to be destroying the Earth. Um, his friendship with the child sort of changes his plans. I think he's got amnesia. It's been a while since I've seen the film, but at the end of the movie, Iron Giant actually sacrifices himself to save the child, his little friend, and people are sad. And then it's a little bit happy because at the end, it looks like the Iron Giant is still sort of alive because he's a robot, so he can just get reassembled and turn back on. Um, this is basically more or less the plot of Terminator 2. There are some differences. Most importantly, that time travel is not really seemingly a factor in Iron Giant. But Terminator 2 is a film about a robot that goes back in time to save this little boy from another robot that's going to kill the little boy so that more robots later can destroy the world. And the first robot befriends the boy, and they become pals. And at the end of Terminator 2, the robot also sacrifices himself um, to save the boy, and it's sort of implied that he might come back, and of course he does. Um, so I'm sort of not giving you a really accurate depiction of either of these films, but they're very similar in some ways. There are some key differences, which I believe were just a way to so that people wouldn't know, oh, that's blatantly just copying Terminator 2. Iron Giant had to be a little bit different and had to do other things to kind of separate itself in the eye of the public. But when you think about it, they're so similar. They're very similar films. Um, if that's was the only case, if that was the only case of Brad Bird making a film that had some similarities to an adult-oriented sci-fi film, then that would be one thing. Um, but then he went and did it again with his Pixar masterpiece, The Incredibles, which is a great film. So is The Iron Giant. Actually, they're both really good, pretty good movies that I liked a lot. A lot of other people liked them. Um, uh, Other people I've talked to have expressed that they enjoyed them. So good job, Brad Bird. The Incredibles, is kind of it has it openly sort of has a lot in common with things like in James Bond films. It's sort of a spy movie kind of. It has it pays homage to some action and spy movie tropes, and it does it very gleefully and openly. But The Incredibles, as anybody could tell you, is just the G-rated version of The Watchmen. The Watchmen is a originally a graphic novel written by the elusive Alan Moore, depicting a world in which costumed superheroes are real, but they are forced into hiding or retirement due to legislation that regulates them and essentially outlaws them eventually. And The Incredibles is also about a world in which superheroes are common and real, but the government becomes worried that, they are too powerful, so the government outlaws superheroes and tells them you need to hang it up. You need to put your costumes away, pretend you don't have powers, and just be normal. And both stories reflect on the consequences of such actions. The villains are also similar. In The Watchmen, there's a character who doesn't really seem to have a superpower beyond the fact that he is very intelligent and maniacal, and he constructs these very elaborate schemes and plans to kind of for what he deems to be a way to save Earth. The villain in Brad Bird's The Incredibles doesn't have superpowers, but he is very, very intelligent, and he builds these big robots and machines and elaborate schemes. So they're similar villains. There's similar premises generally. There are some differences, but as a jumping off point, it's interesting. But again, if that was all it was, then that wouldn't be suspicious. It would be interesting, but it wouldn't be suspicious. But then I saw Brad Bird's film Tomorrowland, and I was very excited to see Tomorrowland. I like the idea of a futuristic city that's really advanced that exists right now in our real world. So that was an interesting concept. But as I was watching Tomorrowland, I noticed more and more that it is basically BioShock. It is so similar to BioShock, which again is a very graphic, intense, violent, adult-oriented video game. Tomorrowland tells the story. I don't completely remember all the details. It was something about some girl who finds something, and she ends up finding this city that was built, Tomorrowland, and the city is supposed to be free from, the constraints of government or religion or other kinds of social constructs that limit and hinder freedom and progress and innovation and scientific ingenuity and all these things. And without all of those limitations and regulations, the city became really advanced and created all these great, marvelous inventions and is way ahead of, the rest of the world. But it becomes corrupted from the inside, from the people who control the city, who built the city. They become corrupted, and it starts to ruin and destroy the city, and it's facing imminent collapse that could have repercussions globally. BioShock, similarly, is about a city that was built underwater for the same sort of reasons. They wanted to, innovate and invent things, but not be constrained at all by morality or ethics or social pressure or governments or religious ideas, things like that. So they created this city separate. And so yeah, like again, they're different. Um, they're very different in some ways, but they're so similar in other ways. And I think I think three different films, it is becoming a trend, and Brad Bird should be watched. Just pay attention. All three are, first Terminator 2, Watchmen, and Bioshock. All of them very adult stories. They're violent. They're about mature themes. Complex moral and philosophical questions come up in these stories. Um, and Brad Bird, I think, thought, look, these are great stories, and I loved reading them, or watching them, or playing them. I would love to give that experience to tiny children as well. So I'm gonna make those stories, but I'm gonna make them G-rated, and they can watch them now. They can watch my films telling these stories now when they're adults, if they're still interested in those stories and in those messages of my movies. They can go find the source material, and they will probably be shocked at how crazy, how adult those stories really are. But it's a a good development for them to go from being innocent children loving stories meant for children to enjoying those same stories, but with blood and violence and guns and sex and all these more explicit themes as well. Um, and I think that's a great. I think that's great. I think Brad Bird is definitely very interesting in that kind of ambition. There's a different ambition. I've seen people kind of want to take kid stories and make them a little darker and make them a little bit more adult oriented. We see this a lot. The gritty reboot is kind of it's become a laughing stock kind of thing in Hollywood now, but for very good reason, because they keep doing it to all of our beloved stories as children and showing them, oh, but you didn't know that this was also, the Power Rangers, there was a drug abuse problem in the Power Rangers that you didn't know about, and there's a dark side to Sesame Street that you've never heard, and so we tried to adultify the kid stories. That is kind of common. I've seen that a lot, but I don't think anybody other than Brad Bird is really doing the reverse in an interesting way like he is. I mean, it's a weird goal. I don't know what his next story will be. Maybe Blade Runner. I wouldn't be surprised if Blade Runner was his next. Or Alien, the original Ridley Scott Alien, could be ripe for a children's G-rated adaptation. These are just the first ideas. There are Con Air, even, although it's not science fictiony enough. Con Air could probably work. Basic Instinct. Basic Instinct would be a good choice, actually. I think that would also be good. If I had more time, I could come up with lots of R-rated films. RoboCop. Um, um, uh, maybe Predator. Maybe Friday the 13th. All of these would be good choices, I think. Brad Bird, consider them. If you're listening, consider these choices, because I love your style. I love what you've done in your movies, and I can't wait to see more child-friendly versions of gruesome and intense and violent and you know risque stories. So, thank you, Brad Bird. Thank you.